So she's got to sit there, watch her daughter just suffer while they're like, oh, we can't do anything. I know if I was there at the hospital, I would do something that I regret. And I would get on someone's ass to do something. So this story starts back in 2017. In August, my daughter was born, came to full term. There were some concerns early on during the pregnancy, but they did some tests and things were ruled out, like things like Down syndrome or whatever. But that wasn't a problem. You know, come to August, she's 40 weeks, natural birth, no issues. But then a month later, my wife starts seeing things. She's like doing these motions, just like what's going on, and it's kind of hard to replicate what exactly they look like with this avatar. But essentially, it looked like she was startled. So her arms would go up, and like she would like have her head just jerk like she's shocked. Okay, so she'd be like, there's no sound she'd make, but these were things that would happen in repetition. And we're a first time parent, and we don't know what's going on, right? Like, we have no point of reference. Like, babies are weird. They do weird things. They're just wiggling around all the time. We didn't think anything of it, but it kept happening over and over again. This is like just a month after her being born. I'm at work one day, and she sends me this link over Facebook Messenger, and it says YouTube is a YouTube link for West syndrome. And I take a look at it, and it's just a compilation of kids, like infantile, like infants, 2 years or younger, and they're doing the exact same thing my daughter's doing. A sudden jerking of the like head back, eyes widen, like they're startled. And I'm like, shit. I start researching what West syndrome is, and all I see is like severe cognitive delay, catastrophic, horrible prognosis, severe difficulties, SUDEP, which is death in epilepsy, which is unexpected. So that can happen in epilepsy. So I'm like freaking out. So that day, I go to my boss and I tell him, I need to leave right now. I need to take my daughter to the ER. So we actually live right next to the hospital. We can walk there. And we go to the ER. They check her out. They're like, and we show them the videos because my wife has been recording it for around this time. She's recording it because, she's like, what's that? What's that? And she shows them and she says, this looks like West syndrome. And the doctors are like, West syndrome? I never heard of that. I don't know what that is. They're like, that's an ER place. They deal with like lacerations and, someone dealing with like a heart attack or something, But like Rett syndrome, they had never heard of it. They had to look on their phone. They had to Google it. And they're looking it up. They're like, this is like some old disease. And it's really rare. And we don't think she has it. I think you're just being like overreactive parents. And that did not sit with us right at all. They totally dismissed us. They're like, well, we'll give you a reference for a neurologist, but we don't think this is anything. So they gave us a reference, and it wasn't for like 2 months, like later. And like, no. We're gonna go to the next closest major city, and we're gonna get her an appointment with a neurology in the city. And we did, like 3 days later. So we're there, and luckily I was able to, get that appointment, and they put her on the EEG, and within like 20 minutes, they come back and they say, it's confirmed she's having seizures. She has what we call now, it's called infantile spasms. It is what they used to call West syndrome, and she has something called hypsarrhythmia. It's a modified hypsarrhythmia. Basically, so every single time she did the motions, that was a seizure. And not only that, when she wasn't doing that, she was having the hypsarrhythmia, which is a kind of seizure that's happening like all the time. So there wasn't almost any time throughout the day that it wasn't considered a seizure. So now they got to figure out what they're going to do. They got to figure out what the cause is, because, sometimes these seizures can be caused by something as little as a vitamin deficiency, which is really rare, but it happens. So they gave her like a vitamin, some vitamin injection to make sure that wasn't the case. They did a spinal tap to check for like infection in the spinal fluid. They did an MRI, and nothing they did showed any cause. So no infection. The vitamin shot didn't do anything, and the MRI is what they considered unremarkable. So they meaning that they didn't see anything. So the senior staff come in because after it was confirmed that she was having seizures, they admitted us. So we were there for like 2 or 3 days. So a few days after her admission, the senior staff, they were like, we don't have any sort of reason for why this is happening. So they classified that as idiopathic epilepsy, meaning they don't know the reason for the epilepsy, and that accounts for like 30% of like all seizure cases. But they told us, this is very serious. The prognosis is not great. She will probably have mental handicaps, and she probably could, deal with this the rest of her life. The whole time we're there, she's having the EEG study done, and one of the younger neurologists on the floor, she had noted that during the EEG study that one of the areas was firing off first. So even though she had what's considered generalized epilepsy, meaning an epilepsy of the whole brain, they were focally onset, meaning they had started at one point and then they went everywhere. And that's a big distinction because if there's one specific part that's wrong, then they can take care of that. If the whole brain is firing off at the same time, you're like, there's not much you can do with that besides throwing medication after medication at it and seeing what sticks. But because it was focally onset, they were able to determine, okay, well, this area looks like it's wrong, and we need to, look more into that. And the younger resident had at that point suggested it could be something which is called a focal cortical dysplasia, which is basically malformed brain tissue. And, at that point, I'm looking up what dysplasia is. I became obsessed with looking for what this was. And, I've learned medical jargon that probably no one will ever have to learn about in their life unless they actually went into this field. And that's kind of the road that we went down, is that they thought it was dysplastic tissue and they kept testing for that, even though an MRI would show malformed tissue. So they still didn't know at that point, and they're just guessing. But they're like, okay, you need to try this medication. She was like on 5 medications at one point, Keppra, Onfi, Vigabatrin, which I'll get into because the whole medication thing is its own story. So when she first got diagnosed with epilepsy, she had to be on, there was like a list. They're like, okay, you can pick from these list of these medications which have proven to be somewhat effective in treating infantile spasms. The first one was ACTH. The second one was prednisolone, and the third one was vigabatrin. ACTH was what they considered the gold standard. They're like, this medication has shown more promise in treating IS than any other ones. It's a steroid. The only thing is, there's some very serious side effects with ACTH. Prednisolone was like diet ACTH, I guess is the best way to describe it. It worked on the same chemistry as ACTH, but it's been found to have less side effects as ACTH. So we went that route first because we're freaking out. We don't know. We don't want her to. The point of my perspective for like healthcare is that you do as little as you can to see how it goes first. You don't want to throw the kitchen sink, at them and have to deal with like side effects. If something can help and it's less, that would be the right way to go. So we tried prednisolone first. It didn't do anything. It did absolutely nothing. So every single drug has to go for like 2 weeks before it's considered a failure. And after prednisolone, we were around 10 days. We're like, we haven't seen any changes. Let's get started with the ACTH because we're like, all right, let's at least try it. It's the gold standard. So we actually had to be admitted to start ACTH because it's a intramuscular injection. So we had to learn how to give my daughter injections in her thigh muscle twice a day for this treatment. And for 2 5-milliliter bottles, which we have to keep in our refrigerator, these 2 5-milliliter bottles, they cost around $150,000 for 10 mLs. Like, if I did not have insurance at this point, it would have been an absolute shit show. I would be destitute. The first night they learned about giving her the ACTH was probably the part where I've hit rock bottom. So this medicine, which is supposed to be the gold standard, I was at the hospital. I learned how to do it, but I had to go back home because I had worked the next day. I had already used my vacation days, for her pregnancy and to stay home with my wife to take care of her while she was giving birth. So I'd already used my vacation at that point. So I had to go home, and I'm stressed out of my mind. I'm trying to relax. Sometimes when I relax, I smoke hookah. So I'm home by myself. I'm just staring at the wall. I grab my hookah, I light it up, and about 10, 15 minutes later, I get a call from my wife from the hospital, and she's just, shit hit the fan. She was not in a good place. She's aggravated, very emotional. What had happened is, shortly after I had left, and they gave her, I believe, the second dose of the ACTH for that day in the evening, her infantile spasms just went absolutely crazy. So beforehand, she would do this stuff like 10, 20, 30 times, like the jerking motion, and they'd last 5 minutes, something like that. It's considered like an emergency if it's 15 minutes or more. So when they gave her the second dose of the ACTH that evening, she started doing the jerking motions for like 30 minutes at a time, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and every 5 seconds, just this. Constantly, hundreds of these jerking motions within this time frame, and she was too young to be given rescue medications like diazepam and I forget the other ones. And my wife is just trying to get the nurses and the doctors like, do something, and they wouldn't. We can't do anything. You just had to let it run its course. So she's got to sit there, watch her daughter just suffer while they're like, oh, we can't do anything. And I'm home. I'm dealing with the guilt of leaving my wife alone to deal with that. Because I know if I was there at the hospital, I would do something that I regret. And I would get on someone's ass to do something, or just, express myself to the point of where I probably would have been kicked out of that hospital. So I'm dealing with the guilt of being at home and not helping my wife and child. And I just remember I'm just shaking because I can't deal with this emotional stress of dealing with everything that's going on. And I remember just sit there and I'm just, everything out of my soul is just dead. The child, my only child, was suffering, and I was home, not doing anything to help her. And I just felt so hopeless. And the only thing I could think about at that moment was calling my parents, telling me, you need to pick me up now or send someone here before I do something I regret. And while I'm telling my mother on the phone what's going on, I broke. As cliche as it sounds, I couldn't do anything more than just scream in agonizing pain. There was just so much anger and sadness that happened during that time. That was the darkest day of this whole experience. After that night, I was told that she fell asleep and the spasm stopped. Not too, like maybe a few hours after she called me. I would have been back there, but the distance from our house to the hospital was too great. By the time I got there, it was done. So I'm told that she'd fell asleep, and then that was the worst of it. So moving forward, after all the ACTH, it did have horrible side effects. Not of just like the seizures exploding, but those gradually went down. They didn't stop, but it also made her retain water weight. So she like just turned into this giant like meatball. And in our culture, we have a celebration for her 100 days. And she just, I see pictures of that now. It looks nothing like her. It just looks like a ball of meat. It's sad to look at your daughter like that and just not like, what is that? I think that's this drug that's supposed to be the gold standard just ruined my daughter's life. And it's something that I regret going for, even though hindsight's 20/20, but I just, if I do it all again, I'd never do that. Luckily, the third option of her treatment was vigabatrin, and that is what significantly helped her. So her hypsarrhythmia disappeared, her infantile spasms disappeared, and she was actually seizure-free for a little bit, but then her infantile spasms turned into a different form of epilepsy called focal seizures. During this time, we're doing more tests to still trying to figure out exactly what it is. And I want to say around month 4, they did what's called a 3T with the Tesla strength MRI. And they felt they had enough evidence with that image study to show that she actually had a focal cortical dysplasia. So that the younger resident was pointing to was actually true. All the EEG studies were showing focal onset in this spot. MRI showed, okay, there's actually a problem here. And they determined it to be a focal cortical dysplasia. So at this point, we're on a progression to go get surgical intervention, and we have to set up with the pediatric neurology surgeon. We got to talk to them, their secretary. They have to present her case to the surgery team and see that she's a fit. And luckily, we were told that yes, she could have surgery for this, and what it would require is opening up her brain, her skull, cutting it open, removing I think first they would have to put literally like EEG like strips on the brain tissue while it's exposed, find out the area that is seizing. So these strips are like hypersensitive. They'll find which area is wrong and then cut that out and then sew her back up. And we did that. There was a whole situation with their secretary where they told us a certain day being pushed back, and then there was an issue with insurance. They're like, they're not going to pay for it. And they had the nerve to tell us because her epilepsy could be treated with medication, like medication wasn't an option, that her surgery was considered elective, meaning that we can choose to have it or not. And here we have the surgeon telling us, yeah, you're going to have a 0% chance of curing this unless you have surgery. The medications, while they might work for a little bit, there's something physically wrong with the brain. So there's always going to be, it's going to work its way around no matter what you do with medication. And so the insurance is like, oh, it's elective. Yeah, you can have medications. So at first they were like rejecting it. They would not approve. The surgery, when we got the bill, was $250,000. It was $250,000 in its open brain surgery. And we're in the hospital for like a week or so for recovery. But it's like all these people in insurance are just pencil pushers and just, their job is to make money, not spend it. So we had to fight with them. We did get approved eventually. And then at like 6 months old, she had her first surgery. And then I just remember her coming out of the operating room, just her head's shaven, and she's got just huge, she's wrapped. She looks like a mummy on her head. And then she was in NICU, which is the neonatal intensive care unit for the children's hospital. And she would wake up and she'd have fever spikes, which would like 103, 104. They're like, yeah, this is normal. She would throw up because of the anesthetic that they gave her. And we were there for a couple days to just make sure that her recovery after surgery was going well. And there's some stories there with that too. It was like, we were in NICU and then like, it's not like separate rooms. They have like the curtain stuff there. 3 or 4 curtains down, I hear a family just like wailing and crying because I guess their child had died. And I remember like a priest coming and giving like last rites. I'm like, God damn. At any point during what my daughter was going through, we could have been those like parents. And it kind of puts things in perspective. As much as this sucks, we have to count our blessings about how lucky we actually were in the situation because, beforehand I was telling you is that like 30% of all epilepsies, like they don't know the cause and they'll have seizures for the rest of their life. Some with SUDEP, you can just die one day and in your sleep from seizures. But here was something that we could do. They found something specifically wrong and they took it out. And when they did the testing on the actual tissue, it's like, yeah, it's this type of malformation. It's a focal cortical dysplasia type 2A. And after that, she became seizure free for 6 months. It was literally on her birthday that my wife noticed another strange movement. And this time it was like just a sudden drop. She would just suddenly drop her head where it, it wasn't natural. There was something wrong. And we had just, 6 months gone through hell, and for it to come back, it's like you'll find this is kind of a reoccurring theme. So on her birthday, she sees the motion. We're going through the whole thing again. Back to the city hospital. More tests, more EEG. EEG showing, oh, it's the same spot that's actually removed from your brain. It's that same area. Fast forward some time, we get told because her epilepsy was in the temporal lobe, it's more than likely that a part of the brain called the hippocampus is actually scarred. Well, we did actually find that out from another MRI study, was that her hippocampus was atrophied. So she was having so much epilepsy in her temporal lobe that it actually shrunk the size of the hippocampus, which damaged it and caused her to have even more seizures. This is typical for temporal lobe epilepsy, but it's not Still hope it wouldn't happen, but there it did 6 months later. And then try this medication. But still, it's like, okay, your pathway is surgery again, but this time, if you're doing surgery, we're going to do something called laser ablation, which is they have like this metal cage around her head, and they use a computer with graphs to find out exactly, it's like MRI guided laser ablation. And they drill a hole in her skull and they stick this diode down into her brain tissue. At the end has a laser which cauterizes the end of it, and they ended up burning the entire hippocampus out from the left side of her brain. Before they did that, they did something also called SEEG, which is EEG is just on the scalp, and then SEEG is literally they drill multiple holes in her brain, and the probes actually go in her brain tissue, because even though they found out that her hippocampus was scarred from the MRI, they wanted to make sure which was actually like firing. So they wanted to do like deep tissue testing. And so before the ablation, they did that. They're like, yeah, the hippocampus is bad. We confirmed that. Next is going to be the laser ablation. Unfortunately, though, during the SCEG, they said not only is the hippocampus firing, but also part of her parietal and occipital lobe is now having seizure activity. So there was two focal spots. You had the hippocampus, which was scarred, and then the second thing, they're like, because she's already set up for surgery, we can go ahead and ablate the hippocampus, but 99% the seizures are going to return because there's now two focal onsets of epilepsy. And sure enough, a month after that surgery, they returned. So again, focal seizures, again, EEG studies after EEG studies, same spot. What they considered the meeting point between the temporal, parietal, and the occipital area all showed seizure activity spiking and the onset of her seizures. We even tried CBD at one point, and there was one medication that really helped. I think it was like phenytoin, or this is just so many, man. It's too many to remember. Just too many fucking names, like taking 5 at once. So after that, she was seizure free for like 5 months just on the medication, but we knew that it was going to come back. She gets presented again for her surgery assessment, and they approve her. But this time they're doing a surgery called a TPO disconnection, which is basically they leave the actual brain tissue inside the skull, but they remove the connections from the rest of the brain. So their thinking for that is that if you were to actually just remove it, it has a higher chance of hydrocephalus, which is a swelling of the brain, and infection and stroke. There's like complications that come with that. But if you just disconnect it, you leave it in there, and even if it's malformed and it's like having seizures, it doesn't matter because it's in its own kind of like island. It doesn't touch anything else. So they were going to do that, and then also a lesionectomy, which would remove what they thought was even more dysplastic tissue. And we got approved for that. Again, the stupid scheduler, this woman was a bitch. She then called our surgery was elective. Like, you work for the surgeon, and you're telling me that this surgery was elective, and you know her history. It's like, fuck off. So we get the surgery, and this one was the big one. Like, this is aggressive. You're going to do this really aggressive surgery, and hopefully the surgeon was like, I don't ever want to do another surgery for her again. I want to be, this is it, and this is done. I'm like, great, that's what we want too. We never want to see you again. Not as like being assholes about it, but we never want her to have epilepsy again, right? So we do the surgery. During the surgery, they tell us that things are going good. We were worried about even more dysplastic tissue being hidden. They tell us other parts of the brain are healthy, and the disconnection is complete. And she was in there for like 9 or 10 hours. So she's going through recovery. On the third surgery, she actually recovered extremely fast. Like, we were out of the hospital in 3-4 days. And after the second surgery, even though it was considered minimally invasive because they didn't actually open up her skull, that was the worst surgery for her recovery because she would scream bloody murder at anyone who came in with scrubs. But the third surgery, she actually handled extremely well. Like, the recovery was quiet. She was like fussy, but not screeching to the point of where you could hear like her vocal cords being strained. And from then, for 2 years, she has been seizure free, and that brings us all the way up to. So that happened in December of 2019. December 5th, 2019 was the day of her surgery. So we're like, okay, we can breathe. This was the aggressive surgery. She's not going to have seizures anymore. The doc says, I don't want to even see you again. We have high hopes. And then fucking 3 months later, COVID hits. And then it's just like we walked from what shitstorm into another. Okay, so my wife is from China. She hadn't even seen her family in China hasn't even seen her since she was born. Her mother had come over 3 times free surgery to support her daughter. God bless that woman. But her extended family had never even seen our daughter, and she couldn't now. So after everything with the surgery, the COVID hits, China's going crazy. We get our first case in March, and everyone's saying, oh, it's no big deal. It's no big deal. Fucked everything up. But totally different story. We move on from going for COVID, hitting us. We're enjoying having our daughter be seizure free for this entirety of time. And then September of this year, my wife sees something strange again. Her eyes are rolling, and it's like involuntary. It doesn't bother her. It's super subtle. I often joke that my wife is a walking EEG machine because she can tell about the aura in the room that something's up. Every single time that she had a relapse, she knows, which isn't good. So she sees something in September and it's like, what's that? And it's the eye rolling. And since then, it's just like we can never escape. I find solace in the fact that for how far she's come at the beginning, where I'm seeing bad prognosis, mental retardation, severe cognitive delays, bad outlook for even life expectancy, all the way to, if you looked at this kid in terms of comparing her to any other child around her age, you would be very hard pressed to find any sort of difference. They took out her temporal lobe, which is used for like word finding, and you can tell, she doesn't speak as well as some other kids around her age. But, there's some kids that don't even speak until like they're 4. And not only that, but she understands 2 languages. She understands Chinese. She understands English. She can speak Chinese. She can speak English. She uses like Chinese with my wife, and she uses English with me. It's like the kid's smart. So I don't know if like her speaking would be kind of hindered because she's going through 2 languages, or with her temporal lobe. The point is, like, if you looked at her as an objective, you would be very hard pressed to find out that she had gone through any of the stuff that I just told you, but it never ends. So in our hearts, in my wife and my heart, it's like there's always that shadow being cast upon us that this is going to return, this is your life now, and you can never relax. So with the eye movements, we have a scheduled EEG in like the next couple days. It's going to be 24 hours because it's possible that these actually aren't seizures. There could be eye tics. She has a lot of eye issues, one of which, because of the disconnection, 50% of her vision is actually gone. And it's not like you see black. It's like you can't even see behind your head. It's like just the information's not there. And that happens when you disconnected the occipital lobe on the left side. It's the right side actually disappears. But because of that, the muscles are fine, but the communication between the brain and the eyes they're not 100%. So it's very possible that she just has an ocular tic, and it's actually common around her age for girls and with stuff with her history. But the thing is that not knowing is bothering us more than actually knowing. If I knew that it was seizures, it's like, okay, we have a plan. We do this, we do X, 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 and X. We know. But the fact that we don't know is just driving us absolutely mental. And hopefully we get good news on the next week or so when she's doing it, and then it's just something we don't have to worry about anymore. So I wanted to tell my story because, like the ER people, not a lot of people even know what infantile spasms or West syndrome is. So I hope that me sharing my story, if anyone has kids out there and you see something weird, we are the advocates for our children. They can't speak for themselves, especially at that young of an age. And if someone's telling you that something is like, oh, you're overreacting, and you feel like something is wrong, you get that second opinion. You get that third opinion. You get that fourth opinion, because you need to fight for your kids. So there's a lot of tangents I can go on with, during your treatment and all of the medications and stuff in the specific amount, how like it affected me and my wife. We're broken. Essentially, we're broken by this. We have a stronger marriage because of it, but it easily could have ended our marriage. But it's been hard. It's been extremely hard, and I don't wish this kind of situation on my worst enemy, to have your kid be hurt like that. Because I'll just tell you one thing, it's just that your kids really are they're a straight line to your soul and your heart. You'll have your highest highs and your lowest lows because of your children. So that's all, I guess.